Did you just sneak out of a refugee camp? Or did the Border Patrol let you through looking like that?
Lawrence Ashford said it in French, loud. 8 guests at the table. Not one blinked. Fiona Collins set the bottle down. Steady hands.
Your wine is from Burgundy, sir. 2011 vintage. Excellent choice.
Cute. She memorized the label. I guess even a stray can learn one trick if you feed it enough.
His associate laughed. The clients smiled politely. A woman across the table set her fork down and stopped chewing. Fiona walked back toward the kitchen. Calm, unhurried, like nothing happened. But behind those steady eyes, something was already turning. She understood every word. Every single one. And before that dinner was over, one satisfying reply from a black waitress would silence a billionaire and bury his $100 million deal for good. Yo, that moment? That was the explosion. But what lit the fuse 3 hours earlier, that'll mess you up. 3 hours earlier, Fiona Collins walked through the back entrance of Le Verrier. The kitchen hit her first. Butter melting in copper pans, thyme roasting under low heat, the sharp clang of steel against steel. Cooks shouting orders, plates sliding across stainless counters, the kind of organized chaos that only works when everyone knows exactly where to stand. She clocked in, tied her apron, and checked the reservation book. One name filled the entire evening slot. Ashford Capital Group. Private dining. 8 guests. Full French menu. VIP protocol. Ray Tolliver, the floor manager, gathered the servers in the hallway. He was a tall man with deep-set eyes and hands that never stopped moving. He held his clipboard like a shield. Listen up. This table tonight is worth more than our entire quarter. Full French tasting menu. 7 courses. Every glass poured on time. Every plate placed without a sound. 0 mistakes. I mean 0. He looked around the room. Then his eyes landed on Fiona. Collins, you're on the Ashford table. Solo. A younger server next to her raised an eyebrow. Fiona didn't react. She just nodded once and walked toward the dining room to begin setup. On her way, she passed the printed menu for the evening. 7 courses, all in French. A new server, barely 2 weeks on the job, was squinting at the 3rd line, trying to mouth the words. It's Pigeonneau en croûte de sel, Fiona said without stopping. Her accent was perfect, Parisian, clean, like she'd been speaking it her whole life. The new server stared. Fiona kept walking. Later, while polishing glassware, alone in the service corridor, she had one earbud in. Not music, a French literary podcast. 2 critics debating the poetry of Aimé Césaire, rhythm, resistance, identity. She listened the way most people listen to their favorite song. Familiar, personal. A busboy passed by and nodded at her ear. What are you listening to? Fiona pulled the earbud out, smiled. Just a podcast. She said it the way she always did, deflecting, downplaying, making herself smaller so the room wouldn't ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. But tonight, the room was going to ask anyway. They arrived the way money always arrives. Heavy overcoats draped over arms, cologne that filled the room before they did, shoes that clicked against marble like they owned the floor beneath them. Fiona stood near the entrance of the private dining room, hands folded, posture straight, invisible, exactly how they preferred her. Lawrence Ashford walked in first. Silver hair swept back, custom suit, gold watch catching the chandelier light with every gesture. He didn't acknowledge Fiona. He looked past her the way you look past a coat rack. Behind him came his associate, a younger man in a navy suit who laughed a little too quickly at everything Ashford said. Then the clients, 3 senior partners, 2 assistants, and finally 2 figures who moved differently from the rest. A woman with sharp gray eyes and silver-streaked auburn hair. She carried no briefcase, no phone in hand. She observed the room the way a general surveys a battlefield. Calm, deliberate, missing nothing. That was Helen Mercer. Beside her, a tall man with a quiet presence and reading glasses tucked into his breast pocket. Gerald Whitfield. And at the far end of the group, a black man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. Dominique Olivier, French Senegalese, Senior VP of a Paris-based investment consortium. His handshake with Ashford was firm but brief, professional, not warm. Fiona pulled out chairs, poured water, set napkins. Not one person thanked her. Not one person looked at her face. She began presenting the evening's menu. Her English was polished, measured. She described the first course, a chilled lobster bisque with tarragon cream, with the kind of detail that went beyond memorization. She understood the food, the technique, the tradition behind it. Ashford cut her off mid-sentence. He turned to his associate and started talking about a golf trip to Monaco. Fiona stopped speaking, waited. When he paused to sip his water, she resumed exactly where she'd left off. No frustration, no hesitation, like picking up a book at the right page. Nobody noticed the skill in that. Nobody ever did. Then Ashford switched to French. It started casually, a comment to his associate about the deal structure, market projections, numbers. But it drifted. He began glancing at Fiona while he spoke. She's been standing there like a statue. Do they teach them that in training, or is it just natural for people like her? His associate smirked. I mean, honestly, look at her. She probably thinks Merci is a clothing brand. A soft laugh. Ashford took a sip of wine, satisfied with his own cleverness. Across the table, Helen Mercer's fork paused halfway to her mouth. She set it down, slowly. Gerald Whitfield adjusted his glasses and looked at Ashford just a beat too long. Neither of them said a word. Not yet. Fiona moved to serve the second course. She set Ashford's plate in front of him with practiced precision, the rim aligned, the garnish facing forward. As she placed it down, there was a moment, brief, almost invisible. Her eyes met his. It wasn't a look of fear. It wasn't a submission. It wasn't even anger. It was awareness, pure and absolute. The kind that says, I heard you. All of it. Ashford didn't notice. He was already talking again. Fiona returned to the kitchen. She leaned against the wall next to the dish station and closed her eyes. Just for a second. Her hand went to her chest, to the small gold pendant hanging beneath her uniform. Her grandmother's pendant. She pressed it between her fingers and whispered something in Creole, too quiet for anyone to hear. Then she straightened up, smoothed her apron, and walked back out. The chandelier above the table hummed, faintly. Wine glasses caught the light like small golden moons. Ashford kept talking, kept laughing, kept performing his French like a man showing off a sports car he barely knew how to drive. And Fiona kept pouring, kept serving, kept listening. The evening was just getting started. Yo, hold on. This makes me sick. She's standing right there, hearing every foul word about her skin, her worth, her existence. And she gotta just smile and pour the wine? While this clown sits there laughing? Nah. Tell me you could handle that, because I sure couldn't. No way. Fiona Collins didn't learn French in a classroom. She learned it the way you learn a lullaby, by hearing it every single night until it becomes part of your heartbeat. She grew up in a one-bedroom apartment in Detroit. No father, no savings, just her grandmother, Lucienne, and a stack of books that smelled like old coffee and sea salt. Lucienne had been a professor of French literature in Port-au-Prince. She taught Césaire, she taught Dumas, she taught Hugo. She stood in front of a lecture hall and made young minds fall in love with language. Then political violence came, and everything she built was taken overnight. In America, her credentials meant nothing. A Haitian degree, a thick accent, black skin in a country that decided what she was worth before she even opened her mouth. So Lucienne cleaned offices. She scrubbed floors in buildings where people with half her knowledge made 10 times her salary. She never complained. Not once. But every night, every single night, she came home, made coffee, sat in her rocking chair, and read to Fiona in French. Césaire's poetry, Dumas' adventures, stories about people who refused to disappear. The chair would creak with each slow rock. The coffee would steam in the dim light, and Fiona would fall asleep to the sound of her grandmother's voice, turning pain into something beautiful. Lucienne used to hold Fiona's face in both hands and say, "They will look at your skin and decide what you know. Your mind is the one thing they can never take from you. Never." Fiona promised she would finish her degree. She was 3 credits away from a linguistics diploma when Lucienne got sick. The medical bills came fast, then faster, then all at once. Fiona dropped out, picked up a second job, then a third. She held her grandmother's hand in a hospital room that smelled like bleach and plastic. Lucienne couldn't remember Fiona's name at the end, but she still whispered to Césaire. Every word. Perfect. She passed away 11 months ago. Fiona still wore her pendant, still listened to French podcasts on the train, still read poetry on her lunch break. The language wasn't a skill on a resume. It was the last living piece of the woman who raised her. Back in the dining room, the wine was flowing, and so was Ashford's mouth. 2 glasses in. That's all it took. The filter, whatever thin filter he had, was gone. He leaned back in his chair like a man who had never been told no in his life. And he probably hadn't. In French, to his associate, "You know what's funny? These people multiply like rabbits, but can't produce a single person who can hold a real conversation. It's almost impressive how consistent they are at being useless." His associate gave a nervous laugh, the kind that says, "I know this is wrong, but my paycheck depends on pretending it's not." Dominique Olivier sat 3 seats away. He heard every word. His jaw tightened. His fingers pressed into the tablecloth, but he said nothing. His firm needed this deal. His partners in Paris were counting on him. So he swallowed it. The way black men in expensive suits have been swallowing it for centuries. Then came the test. One of the clients, an older man with a gray beard, pointed at the menu and asked about the 3rd course. A dish with a name so long in French that most Americans wouldn't even attempt it. Ashford jumped in immediately. He began translating for the table, confidently, loudly, and incorrectly. He described the dish as a roasted quail with black truffle sauce. He was wrong on 2 counts. The bird was a pigeon, not a quail, and the preparation was salt-crusted, not sauce-based. A small mistake to most people, but in a Michelin-starred French restaurant, it was the equivalent of calling a Rolls-Royce a Honda. Fiona stepped forward. She didn't correct Ashford directly. She would never do that. Instead, she addressed the guest who asked the question. "The 3rd course is a salt-crusted young pigeon, sir. It's a traditional preparation from the south of France. The bird is sealed inside a shell of coarse sea salt and fresh thyme. then slow roasted to keep every drop of moisture inside. The truffle is shaved raw at the table, a black winter truffle from Perigord. It's one of the most respected dishes in classical French cuisine. She said it in English. Calm, precise, no notes, no hesitation, like she was teaching a class she'd taught 100 times. The table went quiet. The gray-bearded client raised his eyebrows. "You know your food." Fiona gave a small nod. "I know this menu, sir." She didn't say, "I know it because I grew up reading French cookbooks with my grandmother." She didn't say, "I know it because I studied the language and culture behind every dish on this list." She just smiled and stepped back. Across the table, Helen Mercer looked at Fiona. Not in her uniform, not at her apron. At her. It was the first time all evening anyone at that table had actually seen her. Ashford recovered fast. Men like him always do. He turned to his associate, switched back to French, and muttered, "She probably memorized the card in the kitchen. Don't be impressed. These people are good at repeating things. It's thinking that gives them trouble." He chuckled. His associate chuckled. The evening continued. Fiona picked up an empty bread plate from the table. Her grip was tighter than usual. Just slightly. Just enough that her knuckles lightened by half a shade. Then she released it, set the plate down on her tray, and moved on. But Helen Mercer was still watching. And she had stopped smiling a long time ago. The kitchen was loud. It was always loud. Pans crashing, burners hissing. The head chef barked orders in a voice that could cut through concrete. But to Fiona, the noise was a relief. It meant nobody could hear her breathe. She set her tray down on the stainless steel counter and stood still for a moment, eyes closed, hands flat on the cold metal. A voice came from behind her. "How are you just standing there like nothing happened?" Brielle, 23. Blonde hair pulled into a tight bun. New enough to still be shocked by the things that happened in private dining rooms. She had taken 2 years of French in college, enough to catch fragments. "I heard what he said, Fiona. Some of it, at least. That man is disgusting." Fiona opened her eyes. "Like what?" "Like the way he talks about you, about black people, in French, right in front of your face. How are you not losing it right now?" Fiona turned around slowly. Her voice was flat. Not angry, not sad, just factual. "If I react, I will lose my job. If I lose my job, I lose my apartment. If I lose my apartment, I'm sleeping on someone's couch while I figure out how to survive." Again. She paused. "So I don't react." Brielle opened her mouth. Then I closed it. There was nothing to say about math like that. The kitchen door swung open. Ray Tolliver stepped in, clipboard pressed against his chest like body armor. He scanned the room, found Fiona, and walked straight to her. "Collins, a word." They stepped into the narrow hallway between the kitchen and the storage room. The light above them flickered every few seconds. Ray spoke low. "I don't know exactly what's being said at that table, but I know enough to know it ain't right." He paused, rubbed the back of his neck. "But Fiona, your job tonight is to smile and serve. That's it. We cannot afford to lose this client. I'm sorry. That's just how it is." He wasn't cruel. Fiona could see it in his eyes, the same exhaustion she saw in her own mirror every morning. Ray wasn't choosing cruelty. He was choosing survival. The same math, the same trap, just a different seat at the same broken table. Fiona nodded. "I know." Ray held her gaze for a second longer than usual. Then he walked away. His shoes squeaked against the tile. The flickering light buzzed above her head. She turned back toward the dining room, But before she reached the door, she almost walked straight into someone. Dominique Olivier, standing in the hallway, on his way back from the restroom. They looked at each other, two black faces in a space built for silence. Dominique spoke first, quietly, in French, almost like he couldn't help it. "I'm sorry." 2 words, heavy as stones. Fiona stared at him. Then, without thinking, without planning, she answered, in French, perfect, effortless, barely above a whisper. "You don't need to apologize for him." Dominique froze. His lips parted slightly. His eyes widened just enough to show that everything he assumed about her had just shattered in a single sentence. He opened his mouth to respond, but Fiona was already walking away, back straight, apron smooth, pendant tucked beneath her collar. Dominique stood alone in the hallway for 3 full seconds. Then he straightened his tie, walked back to the table, picked up his wine glass. His hand was shaking, and when he looked at Lawrence Ashford across the table, something behind his eyes had changed completely. The dinner shifted, the small talk faded, the laughter thinned out. Plates were cleared, and the table leaned forward. This was the part of the evening where friendly became transactional. Ashford straightened his tie and opened his portfolio. Numbers, projections, timelines. He was pitching the final terms of a $100 million acquisition to Helen Mercer and her partners, and he was doing it the way he did everything, loud, polished, and completely certain that he was the smartest person in the room. He dropped French phrases into his pitch like accessories. A word here, a financial term there. It was a performance, designed to impress Dominique's consortium and signal that Ashford was a man of the world. But there was a problem. His French was wrong. Not obviously wrong. Not the kind of wrong that makes people laugh. The kind of wrong that only someone truly fluent would catch. He misused a key financial term. He mistranslated a clause from the deal prospectus. Small errors. But in a $100 million deal, small errors are not small at all. Dominique noticed. His pen stopped moving. He looked down at his own copy of the prospectus and then back at Ashford. But he said nothing. Not yet. Fiona noticed, too. She was pouring water 2 feet away, close enough to hear every syllable, close enough to know that Ashford had just mistranslated net liability as net profit, a difference that could swing the entire deal structure. She filed it away, quietly, the way she had been filing everything all night. Then came the wine. Ashford called for a specific bottle, a 2011 Burgundy, one of the most prestigious vintages in the world, the kind of wine that separates people who drink from people who perform. The bottle arrived. Ashford swirled it, sniffed it, took a theatrical sip. Then he set the glass down with a frown and shook his head. "This isn't right. This is 2009 at best. Send it back." He said it in French, loud enough for Dominique to hear. A show of sophistication, a flex, except he was wrong. The wine was exactly what he ordered. The 2011 vintage had a sharper mineral profile than the 2009. Different soil conditions that year. Slightly cooler growing season. Any true sommelier would know the difference. And so would anyone who had spent years studying French culinary tradition in books that smelled like old coffee. Fiona knew. She said nothing to Ashford. Instead, she walked to Ray and whispered. Ray confirmed with the sommelier. The bottle was correct. Ray returned to the table and informed Ashford, politely, diplomatically, that the vintage was indeed the 2011 he had requested. Ashford's neck turned red. He waved his hand dismissively and changed the subject. Helen Mercer watched the entire exchange. She didn't say a word, but she picked up her napkin, folded it slowly, and placed it back on her lap. The gesture of a woman reorganizing her thoughts.
Fiona returned with the dessert menus. She placed one in front of each guest, but when she reached Dominique, she did something almost invisible. She turned his menu slightly, just a few degrees, enough that one line faced him directly, a dessert called Le Retour, the return. Dominique looked at the name. Then he looked up at Fiona. Their eyes met for less than a second.
But in that second, a conversation happened without a single word. She was telling him, "I'm still here. I hear everything. And I'm not going anywhere." Dominique looked back down at his menu. His pen was still. His breathing had changed. Something was building, and everyone at that table could feel it, except the one person who should have been paying attention.
Helen Mercer excused herself from the table between courses.
She didn't go to the restroom. She walked directly toward the service station, where Fiona was organizing dessert plates. No small talk, no warm-up. Helen spoke the way she did everything, with precision. "You speak French." It wasn't a question. It was a statement delivered with the certainty of someone who had spent 30 years reading people for a living.
Fiona's hands stopped moving. She looked up. Her guard went up instantly, the way it always did when someone got too close to the truth.
"I'm sorry, ma'am? I watched your face during every word that man said tonight. You didn't flinch. You didn't look confused. You didn't react at all. And that kind of control only comes from someone who understood everything and chose not to respond."
Silence. The kitchen noise filled the gap. Clanging pots, running water, a cook cursing at a burned sauce.
Fiona kept her voice steady. "I'm just doing my job, ma'am." Helen tilted her head. "No, you're doing something much harder than your job." She said it without pity, without charity, without the tone that rich people sometimes use when they want to feel good about noticing someone beneath them. Helen said it the way one professional speaks to another, eye to eye, level ground. Then she shared something she almost never shared. "I grew up in rural Pennsylvania. My mother worked 2 jobs. I waited tables at a truck stop from the time I was 15. Truckers, drunks, men who thought the uniform meant they could say anything." She paused. Her sharp gray eyes softened, just barely, just for a moment. "I know what it looks like when someone is playing a longer game than the rest of the room realizes. And I see it in you."
Fiona swallowed. Her fingers found the pendant beneath her collar without her even realizing it. Helen continued, "I'm going to ask you something unusual. I need you to trust me for the next 30 minutes. Stay close to the table during the final round of discussion. Can you do that?" "Why?" "Because I think before this dinner is over, the truth is going to matter more than anyone at that table expects. And I want someone nearby who actually knows what's being said."
Fiona studied Helen's face, searching for the catch, the angle, the hidden cost. She had learned a long time ago that when powerful people ask you for favors, the price usually shows up later. But then she heard it. Not Helen's voice, her grandmother's. "When a door opens, you don't ask why. You walk through." Lucienne's words, clear as coffee steam, warm as a rocking chair. Fiona nodded once. "I'll stay close." Helen held her gaze for one more second. Then she straightened her jacket, turned, and walked back toward the dining room. Fiona stood alone at the service station. Her hand was still on the pendant. For the first time all evening, something new flickered behind her eyes. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was permission. Helen was halfway back to the table when she stopped, turned around. Her eyes landed on the pendant, the small gold piece catching the light beneath Fiona's collar. That's beautiful. Haitian? Fiona's hand went to it instinctively, the way you touch something that holds a person who's gone. My grandmother's. Helen took a step closer, not too close, just enough to say, I'm not asking as a client, I'm asking as a person. Tell me one thing about her. Fiona hesitated, not because she didn't have anything to say, because she had too much. A lifetime of words pressed behind a door she kept locked during work hours. Then she opened it, just a crack. She could recite Césaire from memory, every poem, every line, even at the end, when she forgot my name, when she forgot what year it was. She still remembered the words, every single one. Silence. The hallway felt smaller. The kitchen noise faded, like someone turned the volume down on the world. Helen's eyes glistened. She didn't wipe them. She didn't look away. She reached out and touched Fiona's arm, briefly, gently, the way you touch someone when words aren't enough, but you need them to know you heard them. No response was necessary. None came. Helen walked back to the dining room. Fiona watched her go. Then another voice, closer, quieter. Gerald Whitfield had appeared from somewhere, the way quiet men always do. He stood a few feet away with his hands in his pockets and his reading glasses catching the hallway light. He spoke in French, softly, like placing a flower on a grave. Your grandmother would be proud of you tonight. Fiona's chest tightened, her lips pressed together. The pendant felt warm against her skin, almost alive. She blinked hard, twice, then nodded without trusting her voice. Gerald gave a small smile and walked away. Fiona stood still, breathing, holding herself together the way she always did, by force of will and nothing else. Then she turned and headed back toward the dining room. She passed Dominique's chair on the way to the service station. He didn't look up, but as she passed, he murmured 3 words in French, so quiet that only she could hear. We see you. 3 words, that's all. Fiona didn't respond. But something changed. Her shoulders pulled back, her chin lifted, her spine straightened in a way that had nothing to do with posture and everything to do with what happens when someone finally tells you, you are not invisible. She picked up the water pitcher and walked toward the table, not hiding anymore. The table had changed. The candles were lower. The plates had been cleared. What was left was business, raw, undiluted, and worth $100 million. Ashford leaned forward, portfolio open, pen in hand. This was his stage, his moment, the part of the evening he had been building toward all night. He addressed Helen Mercer directly. The terms are straightforward. Ashford Capital acquires the full portfolio. Your clients transition under our management umbrella. Dominique's consortium handles the international arm. Clean, simple, everyone wins. Helen listened, arms crossed, face unreadable. Ashford began walking through the numbers, projections, revenue splits, management fees. He spoke in English for the table, but kept switching to French when speaking to his associate, the way he always did when he wanted to say what he really meant. And what he really meant was ugly. In French, to his associate, the terms I just presented are inflated by 15%. The margin runs through a subsidiary we set up in Delaware. She won't catch it. These consulting types never look past the second decimal. Fiona was refilling water glasses. 2 feet away. Her hand moved slowly, steadily. She didn't look up, but she heard every word, every number, every lie. She filled it. Ashford continued his pitch. He turned to Dominique and spoke in French, warm, collegial, as if they were old friends. Of course, your consortium is essential to the international structure, Dominique. Absolutely essential. Then he turned back to his associate, still in French, still smiling. Essential for the paperwork, anyway. Once the ink is dry, we don't actually need the Africans. We phase them out in year 2. Quietly. Dominique heard it. Every syllable. His face didn't move, but something behind his eyes collapsed. The last thin thread of professional tolerance finally snapping. Gerald Whitfield heard it too. His hand curled into a fist beneath the table, slow, tight, the knuckles turning white against his thigh. Helen Mercer's pen stopped writing. But Ashford wasn't done. 3 glasses of wine had turned confidence into recklessness. He looked at Fiona, who was setting down the water pitcher, and nudged his associate, in French, loud enough for half the table to hear. Look at her. Same empty expression as my housekeeper. Some people are just born to serve. It's in the blood. The air left the room, not slowly, all at once, like someone opened a window at 30,000 feet. Dominique set his glass down. Gerald's jaw locked. Helen looked directly at Fiona. And Fiona, for the first time all evening, stopped moving. She set the water pitcher on the table, slowly, deliberately. The way you set something down when you've decided you're not picking it up again. Then she turned to Lawrence Ashford and spoke. In French. Flawless. Perfect Parisian French. The kind of French that doesn't come from business school or language apps or summer vacations. The kind that comes from being read to sleep every night by a woman who loved words more than anything in the world. Monsieur Ashfeld, my grandmother once told me that language is not a weapon for the insecure. It's a bridge for the brave. The table went silent. Not quiet, silent. The kind of silence that presses against your eardrums. She also taught me the difference between a man who speaks French and a man who understands it. You, sir, have shown neither tonight. Ashford's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Fiona didn't stop. Her voice stayed level, calm. Every word placed like a surgeon setting a blade. For the record, the wine you sent back earlier was the correct vintage, a 2011 Burgundy. The mineral profile was sharper because of cooler soil conditions that year. You would know that if your knowledge went beyond labels. She turned slightly, just enough to address the full table. The terms Monsieur Ashford presented tonight are inflated by 15%. The margin is routed through a subsidiary structure designed to be invisible on first review. And his comments about Monsieur Olivier's consortium, that they are, in his words, not actually needed once the paperwork is signed, I believe that would be of interest to everyone at this table. Dead silence. Ashford's face cycled through 3 colors in 5 seconds. White, red, gray. Fiona looked at him one final time. Some of us were not born to serve, monsieur. Some of us simply chose to, until the right moment. She picked up her tray, held it at her side, and stood perfectly still. The room didn't breathe. Then Dominique Olivier stood, slowly, chair scraping against marble. He buttoned his jacket with steady hands and looked directly at Ashford. She's right. And she just said everything I needed to hear. He closed his portfolio. My consortium is withdrawing from this deal, effective immediately. Ashford sputtered. You can't. She's a waitress. She doesn't know. She knows exactly what she's saying. Dominique's voice was ice, which is more than I can say for you. Helen Mercer closed her portfolio next, calm, precise, like shutting a book she had finished reading. Mr. Ashford, I think we're done here. Mercer and Whitfield will not be proceeding with this acquisition. Not tonight. Not ever. Ashford looked around the table, searching for an ally, a lifeline, someone to tell him this wasn't happening. No one moved. No one spoke. His associates stared at the tablecloth like it contained the meaning of life. $100 million deal. Dead. In under 2 minutes. Killed, not by a competitor, not by a market crash, not by a legal challenge.
By a waitress in an apron who spoke better French than the billionaire who tried to use it against her. Fiona turned and walked toward the kitchen, back straight, steps even, pendant swaying gently beneath her collar. Behind her, the chandelier hummed, the wineglasses sat untouched, and Lawrence Ashford sat in his chair with his mouth slightly open, staring at the doorway where she had disappeared. The most expensive silence of his life.
The door closed behind Ashford so hard the wineglasses rattled. He was gone. His associate scrambled after him, grabbing papers, fumbling with a briefcase, nearly tripping over his own chair. The private dining room emptied of their presence like smoke clearing after a fire. What was left was silence. The heavy kind. The kind that follows something nobody expected, and everyone will remember. Ray Tolliver stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the dining room. He had heard the commotion, the raised voices, the scraping chairs. Now he stood frozen, clipboard against his chest, staring at the scene in front of him with the expression of the man watching his entire career flash before his eyes. He looked at Fiona. She was standing near the service station, tray at her side, apron still on, face completely still. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, Helen Mercer was already on her feet. She didn't rush. She didn't raise her voice. She stood the way a woman stands when she wants every person in the room to understand that what she's about to say is not a suggestion. She looked at the remaining guests, Gerald, Dominique, 3 senior associates, and spoke.
I've spent 30 years in consulting. 30 years across boardrooms in New York, London, Geneva, and Tokyo. I have sat across from CEOs, heads of state, and Nobel laureates. She paused, let the weight settle. What I just witnessed was one of the most extraordinary displays of composure, intelligence, and courage I have ever seen. In any room, at any table, from anyone. She turned to Fiona. What's your name? Fiona blinked. It was such a simple question, but nobody at that table had asked it all night. Not once. 8 guests, 7 courses, 3 hours, and not a single person had cared enough to ask for her name. Fiona. Fiona Collins. Fiona, Helen repeated it, not like she was memorizing it, like she was honoring it. What do you actually do? The question hung in the air. Fiona felt the pendant press against her chest. She felt the weight of every rejection letter, every ignored application, every night spent reading Césaire on a subway train because it was the only place quiet enough to remember who she really was. She could have said, I'm a waitress. That was the safe answer, the expected answer, the answer that keeps the world comfortable and doesn't ask anyone to rearrange what they think they know. But Lucienne didn't raise her to be safe. I'm a linguist. I just haven't had anyone call me that yet. Gerald Whitfield closed his eyes and nodded slowly. Dominique pressed his lips together and looked at the ceiling. One of the associates quietly set down her pen. Helen smiled. Not a big smile. A real one. Dominique Olivier rose from his chair and walked toward Fiona. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. cream-colored, heavy stock, gold lettering. He held it out to her and spoke in French, but this time the French in that room meant something different. My firm in Paris needs a bilingual liaison for our North American operations. The position requires someone with exactly your skill set. He paused. And exactly your spine. Call me Monday. Fiona looked at the card. Her fingers trembled as she took it. The first visible crack in her armor all night. Then Gerald Whitfield stood. He pulled a pen from his breast pocket and reached for a cloth napkin. He wrote something on it, carefully, deliberately, and slid it across the table toward Fiona. A quote, Aimé Césaire. My mouth shall be the mouth of those calamities that have no mouth. Below it, a name. The Whitfield Foundation Linguistics Fellowship. And one handwritten line. 3 credits short? Let us fix that. Fiona read the napkin. Her hand went to the pendant. She pressed it between her fingers, the way she always did when Lucienne felt close. The tears came. Not loud, not dramatic. They just arrived, quietly, honestly, the way rain comes after a long drought. She didn't wipe them. She didn't apologize for them. She let them fall. Ray stepped forward. He had been standing in the doorway this whole time, watching, processing, carrying the weight of what he should have said hours ago. Fiona, His voice broke. He cleared his throat. I should have said something. At the table, earlier. I should have... Fiona shook her head. You did what you had to do. We both did. They looked at each other. 2 black professionals who understood the unspoken contract. The one that says your silence is the price of your survival. No judgment, no blame, just recognition. Ray nodded. His eyes were wet. For what it's worth, your grandmother raised something special. Fiona pressed the pendant one more time. Then she let go. The kitchen door swung open. The head chef, a tall Frenchman with flour on his sleeves and fire in his eyes, walked out. He had heard the story from 3 different line cooks in the last 4 minutes, each version more animated than the last. He walked straight to Fiona, took her hand, shook it firmly. Then he spoke, in French, with the kind of respect that one craftsperson gives another. Mademoiselle, that was magnificent. Behind him, the sommelier appeared, carrying a bottle. The 2011 Burgundy, the same one Ashford had rejected. He set a glass on the service counter, poured it slowly, pushed it toward Fiona. On the house. You earned every drop. Fiona looked at the glass. The wine Ashford had called a fake. The wine she had correctly identified when he could not. The wine that a billionaire rejected because his knowledge was as shallow as his character. Now it was hers. She sat down on a stool at the service counter, still in her apron, still in her work shoes, surrounded by stacked trays and folded napkins and the faint smell of butter and thyme. She picked up the glass, swirled it once, took a sip. $2,000 in a single glass, drunk by a woman in a server's uniform who had just dismantled a billionaire's empire with the language he tried to use as a weapon. The pendant caught the kitchen light, gold against brown skin. Lucienne's last gift, glowing like a small, quiet sun. Fiona closed her eyes, and for the first time in 11 months, her grandmother felt close enough to touch. Morning light came through thin curtains, the kind of light that doesn't ask permission. It just shows up and makes everything honest. Fiona sat at her kitchen table. Small apartment. Clean. Nothing fancy. A coffee mug with a chip on the rim. A window that looked out onto a fire escape and a sliver of sky. In front of her, 2 things. Dominique's business card on the left. Gerald's napkin on the right.
cream-colored card, white cloth napkin, 2 doors that didn't exist 12 hours ago.
On the refrigerator, behind her, a rejection letter, pinned there for 9 months, from the last translation firm that told her she wasn't qualified. She had read it so many times the paper had gone soft at the creases. She stood up, walked to the fridge, unpinned the letter. She didn't throw it away. That wasn't who she was. That letter was part of her story, part of the long road between where she started and where she was going. But it didn't get to face her every morning anymore. She folded it once, placed it in a drawer, closed it. Then she opened her laptop and started typing. 2 emails. One to Dominique's firm in Paris. One to the Whitfield Foundation Fellowship Office. On the counter beside her, Lucien's pendant, resting on a worn paperback copy of Césaire's poetry. The cover was cracked. The pages were yellow. Some of them had small pencil marks in the margins. Lucien's handwriting. Notes from a professor who never stopped teaching, even when the world stopped listening. Here's what happened next. Ashford Capital Group's deal collapse made industry news within a week. When auditors looked closer, they found the subsidiary structure Fiona had exposed. Regulatory investigators followed. Ashford didn't go to prison. Men like him rarely do. But his reputation, the one thing money can't buy back, was finished. Helen Mercer personally recommended Fiona for 3 interpreter positions with international firms. She made phone calls, wrote letters, put her name on the line for a woman she had known for less than 2 hours. Because sometimes 2 hours is more than enough to see who someone really is. Dominique's firm flew Fiona to Paris for a formal interview. She got the job. Her first evening in the city, she walked along the Seine at sunset. She stopped on a bridge and watched the light turn the water gold. Then she did something she hadn't done since Lucien passed. She spoke French out loud. Not to anyone, just to the air, to the river, to the memory of a woman in a rocking chair who turned a language of survival into a language of love. She cried on that bridge, in public, and she didn't care. 8 months later, Fiona completed her linguistics degree. 3 credits. That's all that had stood between her and everything. She graduated with honors. She wore the pendant under her gown. When a reporter asked her about that night at the restaurant, about the moment she finally spoke, Fiona said something that traveled further than any deal Ashford ever closed. He spoke French to hide who he was. I spoke French to show who I am. The most powerful language in the world isn't French. It isn't English. It's knowing your worth when no one else does. Bruh, this one wrecked me. Imagine standing right there, hearing every disgusting word about your skin, your worth, and you gotta just smile and pour the wine. Could you hold it together like that? Seriously. If you've ever been overlooked, drop your story below. Like this if it hit home.